Excellent. So our last speaker for this session is Erin Vogel. She is a postdoctoral researcher in the Department of Medicine at the Stanford Prevention Research Center.
Thank you for the introduction, and thanks for having me here today. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the Stanford Prevention Research Center, and today I'll be talking about my research on the effects of brief exposure to social media content related to vaping on adolescents' intentions and attitudes around vaping. So I hope this will be of interest if you work with adolescents or if you have any in your life who use social media, which nearly all of them do. When we see images and advertisements such as these, we're instantly brought back to an era where smoking was glamorized and advertisements for cigarettes were everywhere. Since then, we've made a lot of progress in combating teen smoking. However, that progress is threatened by novel products such as e-cigarettes, particularly Juul, which is extremely popular with adolescents, but there are many others as well. And these products can deliver a high amount of nicotine to teenagers and often come in flavors that appeal to kids. In 2019, 27.5% of teenagers reported that they had used e-cigarettes in the past month alone. So this is becoming an enormous public health problem that continues to grow. And it may be exacerbated by the use of social media. So when teenagers use social media, they're exposed not only to advertisements, such as this one from Juul, which has since been removed from Instagram, they also see pictures of their peers, people they know and people they don't know, who are around their age or a little bit older, using these products, which may have a strong influence on their attitudes toward the products, intentions to use them, and their actual use. So the purpose of my study was to investigate the impact of social media content on adolescents' thoughts and intentions around using e-cigarettes. The first aim was to examine the association between social media use in daily life, separate from anything we did in the experiment, and teenagers' thoughts and intentions around e-cigarettes. And secondly, I wanted to experimentally test exposure to different types of social media content related to e-cigarettes on teenagers' thoughts and intentions. So I'll give you an overview of the procedure of this study, and then I'll go into each of these components in more detail. First, we recruited a sample of adolescents aged 13 to 18 online, and these participants were randomly assigned to experimental conditions, to one condition in a 2x2 design, and that condition determined the Instagram posts that they would see next. So participants were assigned to see posts that either supposedly came from another teenager, a peer, or that were advertisements. And then in addition to that, they had either heavy exposure to e-cigarette content, meaning the majority of the posts they saw were related to e-cigarettes, or light exposure, in which only one of the posts was related to e-cigarettes and the others were unrelated. After viewing those 6 posts, participants completed a series of self-report measures. We recruited adolescents aged 13 to 18, all of whom resided in California. And this study was conducted through Ipsos Knowledge Panel, which is the largest probability-based panel in the United States. So this sample was weighted to population characteristics and can be taken as representative of the population. I'll show examples of social media posts that really represent each of the 4 experimental conditions. So in the top left here, we have a peer-generated e-cigarette post, a teenager vaping. Next to it, we have this advertisement for an e-cigarette. And then going clockwise, we have an unrelated advertisement for Chipotle. And last, we have an unrelated peer-generated post, which is just somebody hanging out with their friends. So these posts are typical of what were shown in each of the conditions. And I did pilot test all posts that were used in the study to make sure that teens could correctly identify whether it was a peer-generated post or an advertisement, and that they viewed the posts as realistic and the people as being roughly in their age range. And in each condition, 2 of the posts depicted people and 2 of them did not. The primary outcome was willingness to use e-cigarettes. So this study was informed by a theory called the prototype willingness model, which says that even if teenagers don't explicitly intend to perform a behavior such as vaping, they might be willing to do so under certain social circumstances, such as when someone offers them an e-cigarette. So our primary outcome was this willingness to use e-cigarettes if offered and if given the opportunity. But we also had a series of secondary outcomes, including explicit intentions to use e-cigarettes, attitudes toward them, perceptions of how normative vaping was, and risk perceptions. And for AIM-1, we measured social media use intensity in daily life, which measures not only how frequently teenagers are using social media, but also how invested in it they are, how important it is to them. So the first hypothesis was that teenagers who use social media more intensely would have greater willingness to use e-cigarettes. And this is because they were, when teenagers use social media, they're exposed to quite a bit of content about e-cigarettes and other substances. Second, we predicted a main effect of exposure to e-cigarette content, such that regardless of the source of the Instagram posts, teenagers who had heavier exposure to e-cigarette content would have greater willingness to use. However, we thought that would be qualified by an interaction such that they'd be more influenced by their peers than by advertisements. So we expected highest willingness to vape among teenagers who saw peer-generated e-cigarette posts. We recruited 135 adolescents with a mean age of 15. A little bit over half of them were female, and the majority reported that they had never smoked cigarettes, and interestingly, that they had never vaped. So this was largely a sample of participants who did not have experience with tobacco use. For the first aim, looking at the association between social media use intensity in daily life and the primary and secondary outcomes, we found pretty striking results. We found that teenagers who use social media more intensely had greater willingness and intentions to vape, more positive attitudes toward vaping. They perceived it as being more normative and less dangerous compared to teenagers who did not use social media as frequently or as intensely. Second, we looked at the effects of experimental exposure, so exposure to the different types of Instagram posts on the primary and secondary outcomes. So for all of these graphs, the heavy exposure condition is going to be the red bars, and the light exposure condition, where they were only seeing one e-cigarette post, is represented by the gray bars. The peered posts are on the left, and the ads are on the right. So for our primary outcome, willingness to use e-cigarettes, we just found a main effect of advertising content, such that participants who saw advertisements, regardless of whether those ads were related to e-cigs, had higher willingness to vape. For intentions, we again found that main effect of advertising, but we did find that teens who saw the e-cigarette content had higher intentions to vape. The same pattern was found with attitudes. Those who saw advertisements or who saw the heavier e-cigarette content exposure had more positive attitudes toward vaping. And for perceived norms, we found that those who saw advertisements viewed vaping as more normative. And there were no significant interactions for any of these outcomes with the post source by the post content, and no significant results for risk perceptions. So in conclusion, the study provides some preliminary evidence that social media content might affect teenagers' susceptibility to vaping. High-intensity social media users might be a particularly high-risk group, as these participants had higher willingness, intentions, attitudes, norm perceptions, and risk perceptions, regardless of what they saw in our experiment. So for future directions, I'm interested in identifying the mechanisms of that relationship between high-intensity social media use and vaping. I don't think it can be entirely accounted for by exposure to e-cigarette content. I think there might be other variables, such as mental health symptoms, that could impact both social media use and vaping. So I'm really interested in those relationships. And I'd like to determine how applicable these results are to other substances, such as alcohol and cannabis. So those are some future directions for my research that I'm really excited to get started on. I'd like to thank the funding sources for this study, including my fellowship through the Tobacco-Related Disease Research Program and 2 pilot project grants I got from UCSF, and my wonderful faculty mentorship team who helped me tremendously with this study. Thank you.
I have a question. Fantastic study, by the way.
Thank you.
Did you see any network effects, like similar to what we see with alcohol and smoking? If like a group of people and their friends smoke, they're more likely to smoke.
Yeah, I would love to. So participants in this study didn't necessarily know each other. We actually don't know their identities, so we couldn't do any sort of social network analysis. But yeah, it would be great to have that data in the future and to be able to look at that. That's definitely something I'm interested in with a different type of recruitment.
Thank you.
Do you have any insights for intervention using the same social media approach?
I think that a social media-based intervention would be an excellent idea since teenagers are on social media so much anyway. I know that's something that the Truth Initiative is working on, but other than that, I don't know of any current large-scale efforts to do that. But I think that that's definitely a really important direction for future research and intervention development. I think that important targets could be social norms, since you can use social media to alter perceptions of how normative something is, and it can also be a way to disseminate public health messages regarding the risks of vaping and other interventions that we know are evidence-based.
Yeah, I think it's very important because parents are sort of strapped in being able to actually have a positive effect.
Definitely, yeah. Thank you.